Welcome, everybody. This is Dr. Bruce Perry, and I'm here to talk a little bit about emotional contagion. Uh, I think most of us appreciate that currently we are in a very stressful and distressing time. And one of the things that is really important to remember is that we are very, very social creatures. And one of the things that we're all going to experience is that our emotional state is going to be profoundly influenced by the people we interact with, both uh, indirectly through the electronic media and directly. And what I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking a little bit about how this is going to impact our ability to continue to play a leadership role in our families and our communities. So let's back up and just start with a little bit about the human brain. The integration of emerging findings in the neurosciences and in developmental psychology is really part of what the neurosequential model is all about. And one of the things that we return to again and again and again is that the human brain and human beings are basically not really designed or organized, put together to live in this modern world. Even though we created this modern world, there are so many things about this invention of the modern world that are to some degree at odds with our core biology. And one of the fundamental issues related to that is the fact that human beings are very, very, very relational creatures. The huge parts of our brain and body are dedicated to forming and maintaining relationships with other people. And this is really at the core of what was and is the success of our species on this planet. We've been able to live on this planet because we've formed collaborative working groups to both hunt and gather and share what we have with others and to protect our young and basically to thrive in the natural world. And one of the core elements of this is that the lowest divisible unit of our species really isn't the person, it's the clan. And because of this, the human brain has all kinds of really unique aspects that allow us to develop language for communication, to study and be aware of the complex social interactions between all the people in our living group, and essentially almost every aspect of the way we regulate our stress response, the way we form and maintain relationships, the way we feel pleasure or distress, are woven together in a very complex set of neural networks that we use literally every moment of the day. And I'm putting up a beautiful hieroglyph by a wonderful Kenai artist who's kind of illustrating the fundamental clan organization where there were multiple families and multi-generational groups living together. And this is essentially the way we live for 99.9% of the time we've been on this planet. And there's some really interesting aspects to this sort of relational neurobiology. One is that we have these systems that read and respond to others that help us get a sense of whether we belong. But because human beings have always been the major predator of other human beings, we also have part of our brain that's very wary of and our stress response systems will be activated by the presence of people who are either giving us signals of hostility, signals that we don't fit, or people who are dramatically different from the clan we grew up with. And so there's this kind of a double-sided coin aspect to our neurosociology. And really, at the heart of understanding that is this continuous relational monitoring that we do when we interact with other people. Uh, Both consciously, but mostly unconsciously, our brain is continually sizing up in our interactions with another person whether we are getting signals of acceptance and warmth and inclusion, or are we getting signals that we don't belong? Are we getting signals that are threatening? And so our brain is continually monitoring the social milieu, trying to figure out if we belong or if we're under threat. And part of what happens during that process is that we are exquisitely sensitive to these both social, emotional, and behavioral cues that people are giving us. And when you interact with another person, there's this automatic power differential that gets set up. So if you are, for example, an adult and you interact with a child, there's an obvious power differential that you're bigger. Usually, you're familiar with what the interaction is going to include. You know, let's pretend you're a therapist and a new child comes into your office. It's your office, it's familiar. They're coming into a new building, a new waiting room, and a new bunch of people, a new, adult. They're alone with you. They don't know who you are really. They don't know anything about what therapy is supposed to be like. And so there's a huge power differential that's set up. And this power differential will literally shift the person at the bottom of the power differential down the arousal continuum. And again, we talked a little bit about state-dependent functioning in a previous session, but just to remind you that, when you are feeling safe and regulated and not threatened by anything, and you have no physiological needs and there's no external chaos or threat, you're able to use this top smart part of your brain and think in a very abstract and creative way. But the more you feel threatened, the more the lower parts of your brain start to influence your cognition and your behavior, and you can experience a shift in how your brain is processing the moment. And so this is something that I think we need to always be aware of when we're interacting with other people, when we're trying to communicate, when we're trying to understand their perspective, is that there is a power differential that's set up between two individuals. And this emotional and contagion, this relational interaction, can either be something where you increase the power differential by making somebody feel more uneasy, more unsettled, more threatened, or you can decrease the power differential by giving somebody cues of social acceptance, by smiling, by the tone of voice you have, by managing your physical proximity, by making yourself smaller if you're an adult and the child's smaller. And so when you decrease the power differential, you begin to pull somebody back into a mental state where they feel safer, they feel included, they feel like they belong, and they have more access to the top part of their brain, their cortex, which basically means when you are able to be regulated and be warm and be present and send somebody the signals that they're respected and they're cared for and that they're safe with you, they will move down this continuum and they'll be much more capable of hearing what you say, much more capable of feeling safe. And you can do that literally just with your presence and with all of the nonverbal cues that you are sending out. And this relational contagion is absolutely crucial for understanding how do you manage behavioral dysregulation? How do you manage individuals who are struggling, who are basically hypervigilant or motorically overactive because of some threat-related activation? And it may be a long-standing issue because they have a history of adversity. It may be an acute issue because there's something in the present situation that makes them feel unsettled or dysregulated. But you need to remember that if you are a, a regulated adult, your presence alone, as long as you stay regulated and you interact with that child in a calm, positive, nurturing way, you can take somebody who's dysregulated and you can help them become regulated. This is the really powerful thing about keeping your head. And I can't tell you, and I can't emphasize enough how important it is for us, those of us who are parents and teachers and therapists who are in positions of influence in our communities, in our families, in our workplace, that during the current situation, if we regulate ourselves, if we take care of ourselves, we're going to be able to help the people around us stay calmer. And everybody's going to be physically, emotionally, and socially healthier if they're less distressed. This is, a different way of showing the same thing is that if you've got an adult who's pretty well regulated and they're interacting with a dysregulated child and they use rhythm and relational cues the way that we'll talk about in future sessions, you literally can take advantage of this emotional contagion and capture their affect, and it will ultimately begin to reflect your affect. Now, the opposite, of course, is true. If you're a dysregulated adult, you can come into an interaction with a child or multiple children, and literally you will begin to dysregulate them. They'll lose their capacity to be thoughtful, to be well regulated, to be calm. They'll start to feel anxious. They will literally begin to reflect your dysregulation. This is, of course, a problem. And this is we've all seen this. We've all seen it when we've been frustrated or we've come home preoccupied, and maybe our children will start out pretty regulated, but we can dysregulate them pretty easily. And you can do this, this is part of the problem is if you've got a partially dysregulated child and a partially dysregulated adult, they begin to enter into a co-dysregulating escalation. And because they're both feeling the distress and the emotional anxiety from the other person, this becomes a co-dysregulating loop. And the partially regulated adult who's frustrated with the dysregulated child, who's not listening, who's not minding, who's not following directions, we'll start to raise our voice and we'll wag our finger and we'll step towards them and we'll get short with them and we'll basically end up in a co-dysregulating mess. And this is where, obviously you don't want to be. Now, I've kind of been presenting this a little bit in context of children, but the exact same thing happens with adults. And I think that this is really important. You can calm down the people you work with. You can calm down the people you interact with. Just in the same way that sort of anxiety and panic is contagious, so is calm. So if you are a dysregulated, if you're regulated and you're interacting with a colleague who's really upset and really anxious and overwhelmed, just by reflective listening, by being respectful, by keeping your tone of voice, by using eye contact the right way, by walking with them, by just gently interacting with them, not necessarily expecting at this state that your words will change them, but it's your tone of voice. It's all the nonverbal signals that you have. And what will happen is they will begin to reflect your calm. You can calm down the people around you as long as you stay calm. Now, there's one other aspect to this that's really important. And I'll come back and we'll talk more about spacing and dosing in a future session. But one of the keys to all of this is that the degree of relational contagion that you can expect to provide for somebody else is going to be proportional to the time you are with somebody. So the more time you spend with somebody, the more likely you are to both be influenced by their emotional state and to influence their emotional state. And this is where the current situation is a little bit of a challenge, because you may have a dysregulated family member, you may have a dysregulated staff member, and you spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes on the phone, you kind of quiet them down, but you're going to hang up the phone. You're going to, you'll have your 15 minutes on Zoom or 10 minutes on Zoom, and then you're gone. And it's highly likely, if they continue to do things like watch television or call other friends who are equally dysregulated, they're going to cycle up again. And so part of what we need to help the people we work with appreciate is that the more that they can avoid dysregulating interactions with others who are struggling with anxiety, with the news, which in the media is an escalating, medium at this point. Get some information from news sources, but then go away from the news, get regulated, either using relational methods or your own self-regulatory choices, which we'll talk about again in a future session. But don't underestimate your power to bring calm to others, and don't underestimate the impact of dysregulating people on you. The reality is, none of us are invincible from emotional contagion. And so if you find yourself escalating because you've been trying to help everybody in your sphere of influence who's sort of anxious, you need to remember that you're starting to get dysregulated. So disengage, do some self-regulatory things. Maybe you can call somebody who you know is a little bit more regulated, and take advantage of supervision, mentorship, self-regulatory, somatosensory things, and it'll keep you better regulated so that you can then help people in your sphere of influence. Those of you who are interested, if you want more information about the things that we're doing and our access to some more of these little mini didactics, you can go to the website below, and you'll see a lot of hopefully useful resources and some information about some of our ongoing live office hours. Any of you who are interested in more detailed information about this content, you can go to any of these websites and click through some of the materials there. Thanks for your attention, and I'll be back in a day or two with another mini clip.